It was early morning when the diner opened its doors, the same way it had every day for years. The place was small, a little building on the edge of the highway, but it had a big heart. The woman who owned it took pride in keeping it warm, clean, and welcoming for anyone who walked through. Some people came for the food, some came for the peace, and others came because they just needed a friendly face. She never turned anyone away, no matter what they looked like or where they came from. That was just the way she was. She moved around the kitchen with calm hands, wiping down the counters, checking the coffee pots, and making sure the morning bread was warm. Outside, the road was quiet, and the rising sun was still soft. Most days, she expected nothing unusual. She worked hard, made her living one plate at a time, and tried to stay out of trouble. But sometimes, trouble had a way of finding its way to her door even when she didn't look for it. A few minutes after she flipped the sign to open, she heard the deep sound of a motorcycle rolling up the gravel outside. It wasn't the first time a biker had stopped by. Riders often came through on long trips, because her diner was one of the last decent places to eat before the long, empty stretch of road ahead. But this one sounded a little different, lower, heavier, like a machine that had seen many miles and carried many stories on its metal frame. She looked out the window and saw the rider climb off. He was tall, with a heavy jacket that had a famous patch on the back. It was the kind that made some people nervous, the kind people whispered about but never understood. The jacket was old, faded in places, and the leather looked worn from years of weather. The man didn't look dangerous. He looked tired. He stood for a moment with his hand on the bike, breathing in the morning air before heading toward the door. When he stepped inside, the little bell above the door jingled. He glanced around the diner, almost like he expected someone to yell at him to leave. Instead, she simply smiled and said good morning. His shoulders eased a little, and he nodded back. He didn't speak much at first. He just took a seat at the counter, resting his gloves beside him, and looked like a man who needed food and a bit of quiet. She poured him a coffee without even asking because she could tell he needed something warm. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but polite. She placed a menu in front of him, but he didn't open it. "Just something hot," he said. "Anything is fine." She nodded and went to work. As she cooked, she watched him out of the corner of her eye. He sat quietly, drinking the coffee slowly and staring at nothing in particular. He didn't look like a man full of anger or trouble. He looked like someone carrying too many memories, someone who had been judged before he even had a chance to speak. She didn't know his story, but she knew enough about people to understand when someone had been misunderstood. The food came out hot: eggs, toast, and a side of potatoes, and she placed it in front of him. He thanked her again, and she could see real gratitude in the way he spoke. He ate like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in a while, trying not to rush, but clearly hungry. She went back to wiping tables while giving him space. But the peace didn't last long. Only 10 minutes passed before she noticed 2 police cars pull into the parking lot. At first, she didn't think much of it. Sometimes officers came to the diner for breakfast, but today felt different the moment the engines shut off. The officers got out quickly and headed toward the diner with tight faces and hard steps. They weren't coming for food. They were coming with purpose. The rider didn't see them. He was focused on his plate. She, however, felt the air shift. Something was about to happen, and she didn't like the feel of it. The door swung open, and the officer stepped inside. The little bell above the door chimed again, but there was nothing friendly in the sound this time. The taller officer scanned the room, and his eyes locked onto the man at the counter right away. "You," the officer said sharply. "Stand up." The biker looked up, confused. He had a piece of toast in his hand. "Don't play dumb," the second officer snapped. "We know you were causing trouble in town this morning. You match the description." The rider put his toast down slowly. "I haven't been anywhere near town. I just got here." "Save it," the taller officer said as they moved closer. "Stand up." The diner owner felt her heart begin to pound. She had seen unfair situations before, and this one felt wrong. The biker's voice didn't sound defensive or angry. He sounded surprised, almost hurt. The officers stood on either side of him now, hands near their belts. The biker lifted his hands slightly. "Look, I'm not resisting. I'm just telling you I've been here. Ask her." Both officers turned their eyes toward her. She swallowed and stepped closer. She didn't like confrontation, but she liked injustice even less. "He's telling the truth," she said calmly. "He came in right after I opened. He hasn't left. He hasn't caused any trouble." The taller officer narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, are you sure? We don't want to interfere, but this man could be dangerous." "He's been nothing but polite," she answered. "He's just eating breakfast." The biker kept his hands still, looking more ashamed than anything. The officers exchanged a glance. They clearly didn't want to back down, but they also couldn't argue with her statement. She owned the place, and she wasn't someone who looked like she'd lie to protect a stranger. "Fine," the second officer said, though his voice held frustration. "But if we get another report matching his description, we'll be back." "Understood," she said. The officer stepped back slowly, still watching the biker like he might leap across the room. But he didn't move. He stayed still until they finally turned and walked out. When the door shut behind them, the diner felt quiet again, but not peaceful. It took a moment before either of them spoke. The biker let out a long breath. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. She shook her head. "They were wrong. That's all." He looked down at his plate, then back up at her. "People don't usually stand up for me. Not when they see this jacket." She glanced at the patch. It had a reputation, she knew that. But reputations weren't the whole story. People were more than symbols on their backs, or stories others told about them. "I don't judge people by patches," she said, "only by how they act." He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "Thank you," he said again. "Really?" He finished his meal quietly. She didn't push him to talk, and he didn't try to explain anything. When he stood up, placed cash on the counter more than the bill and nodded once before walking out. She watched him climb onto his bike. He hesitated for a moment, looking back at the diner like he was memorizing it. Then he started the engine, gave one last nod, and rode away down the road. She didn't know then that the small choice she made that morning, speaking up, telling the truth, offering kindness to a stranger, was about to change everything. She had no idea how far that moment would echo. She had no idea how many people would hear about it. She also had no idea that by the next morning, the quiet diner she had run for years would no longer be quiet at all. The diner felt quiet after the officers left, as if their footsteps had pushed the air out of the room. The woman stood still for a moment, her hand resting on a table she had been wiping before everything happened. The biker hadn't moved yet either. He was still sitting with his hands close to the counter. His shoulders tense like he wasn't sure the danger had actually passed. After a few seconds, he let out a long breath and lowered his hands. "I'm sorry about that," he said softly. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your place." She shook her head. "You didn't bring anything? They came looking for the wrong person. That's not your fault." He looked down at his plate, the half-eaten meal still warm. He pushed it away slightly, his appetite gone. "I'm used to it," he said. "People see the jacket and think the worst. People should wait before deciding things about someone," she said. He gave a small nod. "A date." But it didn't look like he believed the world worked that way. She could tell he had lived a life where most people judged him from a distance, without ever hearing him speak. She had seen that kind of thing before. The world could be unfair, especially to people who didn't fit neatly into other people's ideas. He stood up slowly. "Thank you again," he said, "for stepping in. Most folks wouldn't. You were honest," she said. That was enough. He reached for his wallet, but she stopped him with a small gesture of her hand. "Your meal's on the house today." He stared at her for a moment, almost like he couldn't believe someone would do something kind for him without a reason. "I can pay," he said quietly. "I know," she said, "but let it be my choice." He hesitated, then finally nodded. He slid a folded bill across the counter anyway, not for the meal, but because he wanted to show respect in his own way. He didn't let her refuse it. She picked it up and tucked it away. When he walked out, he paused at the door and looked back one more time. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she replied. Then he was gone. The sound of the motorcycle started up outside and slowly faded down the road. She stood there for a while, thinking about how fast everything had happened. Some people came and went with little impact, but something about this morning felt like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples hadn't reached her yet, but she sensed they were coming. The rest of the day passed slowly. A few regulars came in for lunch, but she tried not to think about the morning incident. She focused on refilling coffee cups, clearing plates, and making sure everyone felt welcome. She didn't mention the officers or the biker to anyone. She didn't want to make trouble where there didn't need to be any. By late afternoon, the diner got quieter again. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky orange and gold. She finished wiping the counters and checked the doors, preparing to close for the night. It felt like a normal day now, though every now and then she would glance outside, half expecting something strange to happen, though she didn't know what. When she finally locked up, she took a deep breath of the cool evening air and headed to her car. She had lived long enough to know that some days were just odd, and this one had been one of them. She told herself tomorrow would be easier, but tomorrow would not be easier. Morning came, and she returned to the diner as she always did. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and began her quiet routine. She brewed fresh coffee, warmed the bread, and checked the tables. She hummed a little under her breath, trying to shake off the strange feeling she'd had since the previous morning. About 20 minutes later, right as she was setting a basket of warm rolls on the counter, she heard a faint rumble outside. It was soft at first, like distant thunder. She paused and listened. The sound grew louder, deeper, heavier. It wasn't one motorcycle this time. It was more, many more. Her heart skipped a beat. The rumble became stronger, almost shaking the windows. She walked to the front of the diner and looked out. At first, she thought she was seeing a long line of parked cars. But then she realized it wasn't cars at all. It was motorcycles. Rows and rows of them, stretching far beyond the parking lot, onto the road, and down the shoulder. They were lined up like an army, all pointed toward the diner. The shine of chrome reflected in the sunlight. The engines idled, growling together in one deep voice. She blinked, unable to move for a moment. She wasn't scared, but she was stunned. She had never seen so many riders in one place before. There had to be 100, at least maybe more. The sound alone made her chest vibrate. Then she saw him. The biker from yesterday was at the front of the group, sitting on his motorcycle, his jacket catching the morning light. He wasn't alone. There were riders around him, behind him, and beside him, and women of all ages. Some wore jackets similar to his, some didn't. But they all looked toward the diner with a certain purpose. She stepped back from the window. She didn't know what any of this meant. She wondered if she should be worried. She wondered if this had something to do with yesterday. Her hands trembled a little, but she took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and reminded herself she had done nothing wrong. She had only told the truth. A moment later, the front door opened and the little bell chimed. The same biker stepped inside, but this time he wasn't tired. He stood tall, calm, steady, his presence filling the small diner without him saying a word. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, they were quiet. "Just taking each other in. Morning," he said. His voice soft but strong. "Morning," she replied. He nodded once like he had been rehearsing his next words. "I came to say thank you," he said. "Properly." "You already thanked me yesterday," she said gently. "That wasn't enough," he replied. Before she could answer, another rider stepped in. Then another, and another. Soon the diner was full, every chair taken, and still more riders waited outside. They weren't loud or wild. They weren't causing trouble. They were respectful, quiet, almost formal in the way they carried themselves. They sat straight, spoke softly, and waited patiently for her to guide them. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how she was going to feed so many people, but she knew she had to try. She put on her apron again, tied it tight, and got to work. The biker stepped closer. "You stood up for me when you didn't have to," he said. "This is our way of showing respect." She looked around at the crowded room. I didn't expect this. Most people wouldn't have spoken up," he said. "You did. You didn't judge me. You didn't look at my jacket and see trouble. You saw a person? That means something." Her hands eased a little. I just told the truth. And that truth mattered more than you know, he said. Another rider stepped forward. We rode out here to support her, he said. We don't forget kindness. She felt a lump rise in her throat. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to people making a big deal over something she thought was simple. But to these riders, it wasn't simple at all. She moved behind the counter. Well, she said, trying to steady her voice, if you're all hungry, I better start cooking. A ripple of soft laughter went through the room. She worked fast. She cracked eggs, flipped pancakes, poured coffee, sliced bread, and moved like someone who had been running a diner her whole life. The riders offered to help, but she told them she'd be fine. Every now and then, one of them carried dishes to a table or helped refill water. But they respected her space as she served plate after plate. She heard pieces of conversations, soft, sincere, thankful. Some riders told her she had done a brave thing. Others said she reminded them of someone good from their past. Some said they wished more people were like her. Inside the diner, atmosphere felt warm, almost peaceful, even with so many people crowded together. Outside, motorcycles continued rolling in. The rumble never fully stopped. Soon she realized there weren't just 100 bikes, there were 200. The line stretched down the road like a moving river of chrome and steel, glittering under the sun. Drivers slowed down to stare. Some took pictures. Some turned around because they couldn't get through. But inside, she kept cooking, kept serving, kept smiling through her exhaustion. She had never been this tired and this grateful at the same time. Hours passed before the last plate was served. The riders cleaned up after themselves. Some even swept the floor or wiped tables without being asked. They treated her diner like a place that mattered. When things finally calmed, the biker from yesterday approached her again. We didn't come here to scare you, he said. We came here because respect is earned, and you earned it. She looked up at him. I just told the officers the truth. Because you did, I can ride today without fear, he said. That's not a small thing. He handed her a card. Not a business card, not anything official, just a plain black card with a single number on it. If you ever need help, he said, call this, day or night. She held the card carefully, knowing it meant more than it looked. He nodded to her once more. Take care. You too, she said again, but this time her voice carried more weight. He walked out of the diner, climbed back onto his motorcycle, and the others followed. One by one, engines roared to life until the sound grew into a giant wave. Then they rode off, and just like that. The diner was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet one, filled with meaning, with promises. With something she didn't yet understand, she stood at the doorway, watching the long line of bikes fade into the distance. Feeling the echo of their visit in her chest, she had no idea that what happened today was only the beginning of something bigger, something that would change her life more than she could. Imagine the morning sunlight had grown stronger by the time the biker rode off, leaving behind the quiet hum of his engine fading into the long stretch of highway. The woman stood at the doorway for a moment after he left, watching the dust settle. She didn't know why she felt so uneasy, but the scene with the police had left a weight on her chest that refused to lift. She had defended a stranger because it was the right thing to do, yet somehow the whole thing felt unfinished. She sensed trouble wasn't over, only paused. She went back inside and tried to return to her normal routine. She brewed more coffee, cleaned up the counter where the biker had eaten, and checked the register. But her mind wasn't on any of it. She kept thinking about the look on the officers' faces. It wasn't the look of men who made a mistake and felt sorry. It was the look of people who didn't like being corrected. And that made her worry. The diner stayed quiet for a while. A couple of truck drivers came in, grabbed breakfast, chatted about the weather, paid, and left. They didn't notice anything unusual. No one mentioned police cars or misunderstandings. To them, it was a normal day. But to her, it felt like the calm before something unexpected. Around noon, she stepped outside to take out the trash. The sun was bright and the road shimmered in the heat. She heard a soft sound in the distance, first far away, faint, like a distant swarm of bees. She squinted down the long highway, trying to understand what she was hearing. The sound grew louder. Not just louder, closer, deeper, and multiplied. It wasn't one engine. It was many. Dozens. Maybe more. Her heart skipped a moment later. She saw them small figures at first, then clearer as they approached. Motorcycles, a long line of them. Headlights shining in the sun, wheels kicking up dust. The engines forming a harmony of thunder that shook the ground beneath her feet. She stood still, unable to move. The bikes didn't pass the diner. They slowed. One by one, they turned into the gravel lot. She counted without meaning to. 10 bikes, 20, 50. They kept coming in a long, steady wave. Some riders wore matching jackets with the same patch she had seen earlier. Others wore old jackets with faded colors. Some had no patches at all, but they all looked like they were part of something bigger, something connected. Within minutes, her quiet diner was surrounded by motorcycles, lined up in rows like metal horses ready for a parade. The rumbling finally died down as each engine shut off, leaving an eerie silence in its place. Her palms felt damp. She wiped them on her apron. The riders began getting off their bikes. Some stretched their backs. Some took off their helmets and shook out their hair. Some looked around with sharp eyes, taking in everything. But none of them looked angry. None looked ready for trouble. They simply looked like people who had traveled far. Then one rider stepped forward. He had a steady walk, strong shoulders, and a calm presence that felt heavier than his boots. His jacket carried the same patch as the first biker's, but his was newer, the colors brighter. "You the owner?" he asked in a low voice. She nodded, trying to stay calm. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" He gave a slow nod. "We heard you stood up for one of ours this morning." Word travels fast. When it matters, it does. There was no threat in his voice and lead respect. The other riders stood quietly behind him, waiting. The woman swallowed and stepped a little closer. He didn't do anything wrong. The officers just assumed, "We know," the man said. "He called us after he got far enough down the road. Told us what happened. Told us you stepped in when he couldn't defend himself without making things worse." She didn't know what to say. She had not expected gratitude. She hadn't expected anything, really. "I just told the truth," she said softly. "That's more than most people do," the man replied. "People like to judge us before they hear us speak." She nodded, understanding. "I've seen that happen too many times." He smiled, a small, brief smile. "That's why we're here. Not to cause trouble, to say thank you." Before she could respond, another rider stepped forward with a large brown paper bag. He handed it to her. "What's this?" She asked. "Groceries," he said. "Fresh stuff. Fruits, vegetables, flour. Heard your place is small? Thought it might help." She stood there stunned. "I wasn't expecting anything, the first man said. "That's why it matters. You helped for no reason but kindness. So we're paying it forward."
More riders stepped forward.
One carried a box of coffee beans. Another held 2 big bottles of cooking oil. Someone else had a bag of rice. They started placing everything near her door like an offering. She felt her throat tighten. She worked hard to keep her diner going, and some weeks were tougher than others. She never complained, but small-town business life wasn't easy. This wasn't just a kind gesture. It was support real, honest support. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "Really, you don't know how much this helps." "We're not done," the leader said. That startled her. "You're not." He shook his head. "We also heard the police were rough with you. No one likes seeing someone mistreated, especially someone who does the right thing. So, we're sticking around for lunch." "All of us." Her eyes widened. "All." He nodded. "All." She looked at the massive crowd of riders now filling her parking lot. At least 100 of them. Maybe more. Her diner wasn't built for that many people. "I don't have enough room," she said honestly. "Or enough plates." "Or enough we brought our own," a woman rider said cheerfully, holding up a reusable plate from her saddlebag. Most of us did, another rider chimed in. We can sit outside. Don't need tables. Just feed us what you can, someone else said. We'll help clean up after. She stared at them, amazed. She had never seen anything like it. A group that was feared by many, misunderstood by most, standing there offering kindness, patience, and respect. She nodded slowly. All right, give me a few minutes. The riders nodded back, then moved aside politely as she hurried inside. The next 2 hours became something she would remember for the rest of her life. She cooked like she had never cooked before. Eggs, potatoes, grilled cheese, sandwiches, pancakes, soup, anything she could prepare quickly and in large amounts. Riders helped without being asked. Some carried food out to others. Some washed dishes. Some swept the floor each time someone tracked in dust. They didn't stand around. They didn't act entitled. They worked together like a community that had done this 100 times. She hadn't known bikers could be like this. She realized how powerful stereotypes could be and how wrong. While she cooked, she overheard bits of conversations. Riders talking about long trips, lost friends, repaired engines, kindness they'd been shown before, and kindness they tried to return when possible. Some talked about their families. Some talked about rough childhoods. Some talked about second chances. It reminded her that beneath all the leather and noise, they were human, just people, trying to find their place in the world at one point. She stepped outside to breathe for a moment. The sun felt warm on her face. The parking lot was filled with laughter and stories. A rider played a quiet tune on a small guitar. Another fixed a loose bolt on someone's bike. A woman patched a tear in another rider's sleeve, a sewing kit she carried in her bag. It didn't look like a biker gathering. It looked like a neighborhood picnic, just with louder engines. Suddenly, the leader approached her again. You doing all right? She smiled tiredly, a bit overwhelmed. But yes, you handled today better than most people would. I just did what I hoped someone would do for me, he nodded thoughtfully. That's the kind of thing that sticks. She looked at the long rows of bikes. I still don't understand why so many came. 'Cause respect travels, he said, and you earned it. She felt the truth in his words. Not because she wanted praise, but because she realized kindness had a way of growing. She hadn't expected the biker to tell anyone what happened. She certainly hadn't expected 100 riders to show up at her doorstep. But life has strange ways of rewarding good deeds. When the food was finally gone and the sun began to lower, the riders gathered near their bikes. The leader approached her one last time. If anyone gives you trouble because of today, he said, you tell them you're not alone. She didn't know what to say except, thank you. He nodded once, then started his bike. One by one, engines roared back to life. The entire lot vibrated with power. She stood by the door and watched as the riders pulled out of the driveway, riding in a long, impressive line down the highway until they became small dots on the horizon. When the sound finally faded, the lot was quiet again. She looked down at the clean ground, the stacked dishes, the bags of groceries they had left behind. She felt something warm spread through her chest, for the first time in a long while. She didn't feel alone either. She stepped back inside her diner, the silence feeling different, fuller, warmer. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. A simple act of standing up for someone had changed her day, and maybe her life. The next morning came quietly, almost too quietly. The woman woke early, the same way she always did, but something about the air felt different. It wasn't heavy like the day before. It wasn't filled with worry or tension. Instead, there was a strange mix of calm and expectation. Like the world was holding its breath, she got ready for the day. Tying her apron around her waist and brushing off a few crumbs from the counter left from the night before. The diner had been spotless when the riders left, but she always checked everything twice. It was just part of her nature. The groceries the riders brought sat neatly stacked in the small lull, storage space she kept behind the kitchen door. She had stayed up late sorting everything. There was so much more than she ever expected: bags of flour, fresh fruits, boxes of dry goods, even small treats she wouldn't normally buy. It made her smile, remembering the kindness that had poured into her little diner. But with that warmth came a tiny bit of worry. She didn't know if the police would come back. She didn't know if the town would start talking. And she didn't know if yesterday had been a blessing or a beginning of something bigger. She turned on the lights, started the coffee, and unlocked the door. The sign flipped to open with a soft click. For the first hour, no one came. That wasn't unusual for early mornings, but now the silence made her more aware. She kept glancing toward the road, listening for engines, tires crunching on gravel, anything that would tell her what kind of day she was going to have. By the time she started cooking her own breakfast, just a small plate of eggs and toast, the sound came. Not the roar of many motorcycles, not the low rumble of a big machine. This time, it was the slow roll of a familiar engine. Police car. Her stomach tightened. She set her fork down and walked toward the window. The car pulled into the lot and parked in the same spot as the day before. But this time, only one officer stepped out. He looked younger than the ones who showed up before, and his posture wasn't aggressive. He took his time adjusting his belt, glancing toward the diner with a face that didn't show anger, only nerves. She didn't know what to expect, but she decided not to hide. She opened the door slightly and waited. The young officer walked up, stopping a polite distance away. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, keeping her voice steady. He hesitated before speaking again. "Do you mind if I come in?" She thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "All right." He stepped inside, removing his hat. That small gesture alone eased a bit of her tension. He looked around the diner, noticing how calm and clean everything was. "You probably know why I'm here," he said after a moment. She crossed her arms gently. "I'm guessing it's about yesterday." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I heard what happened." Everyone at the station heard. She didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure if his tone held blame or understanding. Then he added, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how they treated you." That surprised her. She blinked. "You're apologizing?" "Yes," he said. "I wasn't there, but I know those two. They can be quick to act, sometimes too quick." She looked at him carefully. "Is this official or personal?" He lowered his eyes. "Personal." She softened her stance. "Thank you. I appreciate that." He nodded again, but didn't leave. He looked like he had more to say, but wasn't sure how to say it. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Go ahead." "Why did all those riders come here?" The whole station was talking about it. Some people think they came to threaten us. Others say they came to cause trouble. He paused. "I don't think they did, but I wanted to hear it from you." She let out a slow breath, relieved he wasn't here for anything harsh. "They came to say thank you." "Just to say thank you?" he asked, confused. "Yes, the man you were looking for yesterday," he called them. "Told them I stood up for him. They appreciated that." The young officer nodded, thinking it through. "I figured something like that. Those groups take loyalty seriously. Also take fairness seriously," she added. "They didn't come here angry. They ate lunch. They helped. They cleaned up. They gave me food supplies, so I wouldn't struggle." His eyebrows lifted with surprise. "They brought supplies?" "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "That's not what I expected to hear. I think people misunderstand them," she said. "They're not perfect. No group is. But the ones who came here treated me with more respect than many others do." The officer nodded again. Then he put his hat back on, but held it at his side instead of putting it on fully. "Well, I won't take up much more of your time. I just wanted you to know someone at the station sees what happened. And if anyone gives you trouble, you can call me directly." She smiled a little. "Thank you. That means something." He gave her a small nod and stepped out of the diner. As he walked back to his car, she watched him with a softer heart. Maybe not everyone in uniform had come with bad intentions. Maybe like the riders. There were people inside the system who wanted fairness too. The engine of the police car faded into the distance, leaving her alone again, but not for long. Later that morning, a group of older locals walked in for brunch. They were regulars, men and women who liked to sit together at the long table by the window and talk about anything from crops to gossip. Today they weren't talking loudly. They kept glancing at her with curious eyes. Finally, one of the older men cleared his throat. "We heard a whole crowd of bikers came by yesterday." She nodded slowly. "They did. That true they filled the whole lot?" a woman asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes." "And none of them caused trouble?" Another asked. "No trouble at all," she said calmly. "They were respectful, helpful, kind even." The group exchanged looks. Some seemed surprised. Some seemed unsure. One older woman leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "What did they come for?" She asked. "To thank me." "For what?" "For standing up for someone who needed it." The older woman smiled softly. "Good. People still need that." A couple of others nodded, but not everyone looked convinced. One man leaned back with crossed arms. "Well, I don't know," he muttered. 100 bikers on the property. Sounds intimidating?" She looked at him gently. "Sometimes things look scary when we don't understand them." But they weren't here for trouble. The man didn't argue, but he didn't look convinced either. Still, they didn't press further. They ordered their food, and the conversation shifted to other small-town topics. But she noticed something as she served their plates. The world around her was starting to change. For the first time since she opened the diner, people were looking at her not just as the owner of a small roadside place, but as someone who had suddenly become part of a story bigger than the town. The rest of the afternoon was steady. A few travelers, a family passing through, a couple of teenagers grabbing fries. Everything felt normal again. Until the late afternoon, she was wiping down a table when she heard the rumble. Not loud this time. Not 100 engines. Just one steady, familiar. She didn't realize she was smiling until the door opened and the rider from the first day stepped inside. His jacket looked the same, worn, all scratched, full of stories. But he walked in differently. He walked like someone who felt safe in this place now. She nodded at him gently. "Back again?" "Hope that's all right," he said. Of course. He took a seat at the same counter stool as before. She poured him coffee without being asked. This time, he smiled a little when she did. "Long day?" she asked. "Long few days," he answered quietly. She leaned on the counter. "You know, your friends surprised me," he chuckled once. "They do that." "They heard what you did. Had to show respect. You brought enough food to fill my pantry," she said. He nodded. "That sounds like them. They also stayed for lunch." "All of them." He blinked, genuinely surprised. "All of them? Even the older ones?" "Yes, and they helped clean." He shook his head with a small laugh. "Well, that explains why they were all late getting home." She smiled, then her expression softened. "Look, I'm glad you came back. I didn't get your name last time." He shook his head slightly. "I'd rather keep that private. But you can just call me the Traveler if you want." She nodded. "All right. Traveler it is." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "I came to check on you. I wanted to be sure you didn't get trouble for what happened." She appreciated that. "One young officer stopped by this morning." He apologized. "Said he wasn't part of it." "That's good," the Traveler said. "Not all officers are bad. Some just follow orders without thinking, and some, well, they try to do right." She nodded. "I know." The Traveler tapped the edge of his cup thoughtfully. "You handled everything better than most people would have." "Not everyone stands up when they see something unfair." She shrugged lightly. "I couldn't just stay quiet. That's why they came," he said. "Our group, we don't forget when someone shows heart." She felt warmth in her chest. "Well, I appreciate the support." He finished his coffee and stood slowly. "There's something else I wanted to say." She waited. "If anything ever happens again, if someone bothers you because of all this, just call the number." "I left under the coffee mug." She blinked. "You left a number?" "Check the counter later," he said. "It's there." She felt a strange mix of gratitude and concern. "Traveler. I don't want you all to cause trouble." "You won't," he said with a calm smile. "We just don't like seeing good people pushed around." She nodded. Understood. He put on his gloves and walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, he looked back. And thank you again, he said. For yesterday, she smiled softly. Safe travels. He walked out, climbed onto his bike, and rode off into the fading sunlight. When the sound disappeared, she returned to the counter. She lifted the empty coffee mug and, just as he said, found a small note taped underneath. It was a phone number written in neat handwriting. No name, no message. Just a number. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. She didn't know if she'd ever use it. She hoped she wouldn't need to. But the feeling of having it, of not being alone, was comforting. As the sky darkened and she closed the diner for the night, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, protected. Not by force, not by fear, but by people she barely knew, who still chose to stand by her because she chose to stand by someone first. She locked the door, turned off the lights, and walked to her small home beside the diner with a quiet heart. Tomorrow would bring Part 5 of the story she didn't know she was living. The night had settled over the diner like a heavy blanket, quiet and still, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the low tick of the wall clock. She sat alone at one of the corner tables where she usually did her paperwork, though tonight there was nothing in her hands and nothing on her mind that felt easy to handle. Her thoughts kept circling back to everything that had happened at Datha Riders. The police, the silent crowd, the kindness, the fear, the confusion, and the strange sense that her life had shifted in a direction she had never expected. She kept reminding herself she was just someone who ran a small diner on an empty stretch of road. She wasn't a fighter or a hero or someone who wanted attention. All she had done was defend a man who was being treated unfairly. She had spoken up because she believed in fairness, because she believed no one deserved to be judged just for how they looked, especially not when they were alone and outnumbered. But the world had reacted far louder than she had ever imagined. As she sat there thinking, she heard the sound of footsteps outside. Slow, steady steps. Not hurried, not threatening, just someone approaching. She wasn't expecting anyone. Most people knew she closed early on weekdays, and after the strange events of the afternoon, she doubted anyone would come wandering by unless they had a reason. The bell above the door chimed softly, and she looked up. A tall man entered, wearing a worn jacket and gloves he hadn't bothered to take off. He wasn't one of the riders she remembered from earlier, but he carried the same calm, present serious eyes, quiet confidence, and a respectful stillness as he stepped inside. "Hope I'm not bothering you?" he said in a deep, gentle voice. She shook her head. "No, come on in. I was just sitting." He nodded and glanced around the empty diner before choosing to sit across from her. Not too close, but not distant either. He took off his gloves and placed them on the table. "I'm here because of what happened today," he said. She let out a small breath. Gosh. Everything seemed to come back to that moment with the police officer. The raised voices, the way she had stepped between them without thinking. She had replayed it so many times, she could still hear her own heartbeat from that moment. "What about it?" she asked quietly. The man leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "The rider you helped earlier, he's not just anyone. He's important to a lot of people. You might not know this, but your actions spread through our group faster than you'd think. People respect him, and he respects strength in others. You showed strength today. Real strength. And we don't forget that." She didn't know what to say. She had never imagined that something she thought was small kindness could ripple out like that. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I only did what felt right." "That's exactly why it mattered," he replied. "Most people don't step forward. Most people look away." For a moment the diner was so quiet she could hear the buzzing of the lights above. She looked at the man across from her, noticing how carefully he chose his words. How he spoke with sincerity rather than intensity. "I want to tell you something," he continued. "The rider you defended, he had been through a rough week. Lost someone close. He wasn't in the best shape, inside or out. But you didn't know that. You saw him, not the stories people tell about folks like us. You didn't judge him. That meant more than you realize." She felt a warmth in her chest. Not pride, but something gentler. Something that softened the worry she had been carrying. Did he? Say anything? She asked. The man smiled faintly. Yeah, he said, you reminded him that the world still has people who don't turn their backs. She lowered her eyes for a moment. It was strange hearing that. She felt ordinary, not like someone who changed anything for anyone. She wondered how a simple act could matter so much to someone. The man continued, he also asked me to give you a message. He said, tell her I'm grateful. Tell her I won't forget. Her throat tightened as she nodded slowly. For some reason, that message hit her harder than anything else that had happened that day. The man stood up gently, as if not wanting to disturb her thoughts. I'll leave you to rest. But before I go, I want to say one more thing. Our group. We look out for people who stand up alone. You ever need anything? You're not alone. She looked up, surprised. I don't want trouble. He shook his head. Not trouble. Respect. You earned it. He gave a polite nod and headed toward the door. Before stepping outside, he paused and added, you might see us again. Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday. She watched him walk out into the night, the bell above the door chiming softly as he left. She sat there for a long moment after, letting his words settle into her heart. It felt like the kind of moment that quietly changed the shape of a life, unexpected and yet somehow meant to be. She eventually stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the empty highway. The world outside was dark but peaceful. No engines, no lights, no crowds. Just the open road stretching on forever. She locked up, turned off the lights, and went home. Still feeling the weight of the day, but no longer feeling alone in it. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. Something inside her felt restless but hopeful, like the start of a day that carried possibility. She made coffee, stood at her kitchen window, and watched the sky lighten. A quiet part of her wondered whether the riders would pass by again someday. Another part of her told herself not to expect anything. Life usually went back to normal when she reached the diner and unlocked the doors. She stopped halfway inside, frozen in disbelief. There was a feeling in the air she couldn't explain. She stepped toward the counter and then noticed something taped to the coffee machine, a small envelope, sealed neatly. Her name written on it in handwriting she didn't recognize. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened it. Inside was a simple note that read, for the one who stood alone. Thank you, nothing more. No name, no signature, but she knew who it was from. She held the note for a long moment, running her fingers lightly over the paper. It felt like something soft and quiet, but deeply meaningful. She slipped the note into her apron pocket and began to prepare for the day. Tables cleaned, chairs straightened, grill heated, lights on, just like any other morning. But the diner felt different, almost as if it carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. An hour passed, then another. The day moved along peacefully, with a few regulars coming in for breakfast. She smiled more than usual, and she wasn't sure why, but she liked the feeling. Around midday, she wiped down the counter. She heard the faint sound of engines in the distance. At first she thought it was just traffic on the highway. Nothing unusual, but the sound grew louder. Not one engine. Her hands froze over the cloth she was holding. She stepped to the window and pushed the curtain gently to the side. Her eyes widened. A long line of motorcycles, dozens of them, stretched down the highway. Turning slowly into the dusty lot outside the diner, one after another, they rolled in, forming a quiet but powerful procession. She counted as they stopped. 10 bikes, then 20, then more. She stopped counting. When she reached 50, because the line kept going, they weren't revving their engines or making noise. They parked in silence, each rider stepping off with a calm, respectful air. As if entering sacred ground, her breath caught in her chest. She stepped back from the window, her heart beating fast. The bell above the door rang softly as the first group entered, not rushing, not crowding, moving with quiet purpose. They filled the diner with their presence, yet somehow the room felt peaceful rather than overwhelming. The same man from the night before walked in among them. Giving her a warm nod, she stepped forward, unsure what to say. What is this?" she asked softly. The man spoke with a gentle smile. This is gratitude. Few of the riders walked up and began placing small envelopes on the counter. Some put down folded papers. Some put down simple objects, tokens, patches, small pieces of metal etched with meaningful symbols. Nothing flashy. Everything personal. We wanted to thank you, the man said. Not with noise. Not with chaos. But with respect. She felt her eyes sting as she looked at the growing pile of gifts. It wasn't the objects themselves. It was the intention behind them. I didn't do anything to deserve this. She whispered. You did more than you know, the man replied. More riders stepped up to shake her hand quietly. Respectfully each, one offering a few words of gratitude. One said, Not many people would have stood the way you did. Another murmured, You helped one of ours. Now we help you. She didn't know how to respond. She only nodded, overwhelmed, but deeply moved. Then the diner filled with soft conversation and scattered laughter as the riders sat at the tables. She began taking orders, moving from table to table, her hands shaking slightly each time she placed a plate down. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the kindness surrounding her. They ordered simple food, coffee, eggs, pancakes, sandwiches. Nothing extravagant, but they tipped generously, far more than she expected. Some left bills folded beneath their plates. Some slipped them quietly into the jar at the counter. Some simply nodded with a look that spoke louder than money. Hours passed, and the diner buzzed with life in a way she had never experienced. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was warm, alive, human. When the riders finally stood to leave, one of them approached her with a small metal badge in his hand. He held it out to her. This is something we only give to people we consider part of our circle, he said. You don't ever have to wear it, but keep it. It means you're respected among us. She took the badge slowly, her fingers trembling. It felt heavy, not from weight, but from meaning. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You already said it, he replied with a small smile. You said it yesterday, when you stood up for him. She blinked back tears as they began to file out, one group at a time. Engines started again, this time in a soft wave rather than a roar. One by one, they pulled out of the lot until the last rider disappeared down the long stretch of road. Silence returned to the diner. She stood in the doorway, the badge in her hand, the note in her pocket, her heart full in a way she had never experienced. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't feel extraordinary. She felt human, and somehow that felt like everything. For the rest of the day, she moved through her tasks with quiet gratitude. She cleaned the tables where they had sat. She collected the envelopes and kept them safely beneath the counter. She looked at the small gifts, each one unique, each one carrying a story she didn't yet know. When she finally closed the diner and stepped outside that evening, she looked at the highway stretching out before her. The sunset painted the sky in soft shades of gold and pink,